Good morning, folks. Good morning. Welcome to Pat Brosnan live from the Batcave. I have a very special guest today, former Assistant Director of the FBI Criminal Division, Chris Swecker. This is a man who knows the truth, not the sanitized version, not the bureaucratic version, but the real operational frontline truth about how threats develop and how systems fail. Chris Swecker, as I mentioned, former Assistant Director of the Criminal Division, is one of the highest ranking law enforcement leaders in America, a man who's commanded counterterrorism operations, run major national investigations, and seen just about every red flag that the rest of the country missed. He's been on the ground in Iraq, he's dismantled terror finance networks, and he's one of the very few former FBI executives willing to speak bluntly and publicly about the catastrophic warning system failures that led to the horror show on July 13th, 2024. When Chris Swecker talks, you're not getting opinion, you're getting the unfiltered assessment of a man who spent his life stopping killers before they act. Chris joins us now, and the country needs to hear what he has to say. So good morning, Chris, and thank you for joining Pat Brosnan live from the Batcave.
Yeah, good morning, Pat. It's an absolute pleasure to be on with you. As you say, I'm sure our paths cross somewhere, sometime. I'm 100% sure of it.
Absolutely. Big city, small town, and, a pleasure to reconnect, and particularly on this extremely important matter. I mean, listen, let's stop sugarcoating the damn thing. July 13 proved, beyond a reasonable doubt, beyond any doubt, that the next assassin isn't coming from some cave overseas. He's not buried in some cave 10,000 miles from here. He's being manufactured right here in America, in his mommy's basement, right? Marinating in some violent chat rooms, poisoned by vicious rhetoric, and targeted by foreign predators who know exactly how to manipulate these weak, angry minds. Look at these kids. These kids are out of central casting of the weak, disenfranchised punk kid, right? This isn't Al-Qaeda training in the mountains, Chris. This is evil, grooming gullible young men in their mommy's basement. Foreign intelligence services, something you're extremely familiar with, have been hunting for these vulnerable nobodies. They're zeros, they're nobodies. Radicalizing them, weaponizing them, and flipping them into lone wolf killers, while our so-called sophisticated, all quotes, ladies and gentlemen, early warning systems are face down and they're sound asleep. July 13th was not an anomaly. It was an ear-splitting siren, a massive flaming red flare fired into the sky. And if this country doesn't wake up, we're going to miss the next Thomas Matthew Crooks before he even racks the first round. And here's what should scare the hell out of every American. Crooks. A 19-year-old nursing home aide who I wouldn't have trusted with a sponge bath didn't hide anything. He left a trail of screaming fire alarm red flags so obvious, Stevie Wonder and Ray Charles would have seen them coming from a mile away. Violent posts, deranged obsessions, direct threats, Chris, to the president. Day after day, year after year. Our alleged federal watchdogs, FBI, DHS, Secret Service, they didn't need clearances, they didn't need training, they just needed to open their damn eyes, because here's the ugly truth. Law enforcement cannot see everything. They never could, but the public can. We have 330 million partners, 330 million eyes and ears, and that is the real surveillance system. That's the early morning grid. We are they. The public's not a spectator. The public is the intelligence network. See something, say something, not a slogan. It's the difference between life and death, and history proves it. Chris, when you look back at 9/11, flight instructors begged for someone to listen. Yeah. They had students who didn't want to take off, they didn't want to land, they just wanted to fly straight. That's not a red flag. That's a goddamn nuclear flare. and nobody did a damn thing. This is inexcusable. This is failure on a biblical level, and we got to smarten up. But then if you look at Michigan, just a few days ago, two guys running AR-15 speed loader combat drills like a terrorist kill team, 1,600 rounds, tactical gear, coordinated move. One witness sees it. One person sees it, says something's off here. What's this all about? And makes the call, and a massacre was stopped cold. To me, success. To you, success. To America, success. Then you have that chump in Atlanta, right? That big fat guy. His family reported their own relative when he live streamed his plan to slaughter people at the busiest airport in America. One tip, countless lives saved. That's success. This works every time. Every American can be a crime fighter, right? The public sees it before the system does. The red flags are there. Every American is a sensor. We're part of the radar. So if something feels wrong, ladies and gentlemen, report it. If someone looks wrong, report it. No one will ever, ever fault you for being too cautious, because the next July 13th is already incubating online somewhere. And the only thing standing between America and the next mass shooting or the next terrorist attack is you. So Chris, please help me. How does a 19-year-old nursing home aide that we wouldn't trust with a sponge bath become the invisible man long enough to rage online about killing the president for years, loads his car with weapons, parks next to the SWAT team guys' personal cars, climbs a roof 130 yards from Trump, and lets 8 rounds go? How in God's name did that happen?
You could not be more spot on. I mean, everything, I agree 100% with everything you just said. Not enough people are talking that kind of talk. You know, they're kind of looking at the shiny objects in every direction. But the heart of this matter is exactly what you just talked about, is the see something, say something, which was pioneered up in New York when you guys were, knocking back the crime and the crime rates in the 90s. And you leverage the public to get in on the suppression of crime, the prevention of crime, underscore prevention, right? You mentioned 9/11, that was a big miss. And after that, it was ingrained on my brain and stamped in our DNA to prevent the next terrorist attack, not just solve it, but prevent it and take proactive means and proactive measures to get out there and intercede when those red flags, the nuclear flares go up. So you're absolutely right. I think the problem we have in this case, in this specific case, there are a lot of problems there. We know it was pretty much of a disaster of a planning and execution on the part of the Secret Service, but it's enlisting the public support on the internet and in social media sites in the non-bricks and mortar world, because I think we're conditioned to report things. I think that message has gotten out, in the bricks and mortar world of crime, that you see something, you say something. But when you're in these internet chat sites and you're in the social media sites, you get in these encrypted, gaming rooms, or there's any number of ways to get in there and interact with others, that when you see something in there, you should say something. And then the FBI, which is the agency that has the responsibility, along with local agencies and NYPD especially, has the mandate to prevent a terrorist attack and intervene. But they can't just surf around in social media sites. They can't just camp out and be Big Brother on the internet. They are dependent on getting some kind of tip or lead, and then they can run with it and do a threat assessment, maybe open up a full investigation. On the other, Big Brother really exists in the private sector, in the high-tech companies out there. They're scarfing up information all over the place. And they were buddies with the Biden administration, and they were collecting a lot of information on political ideology and trying to suppress that information. And they had apparently, during this era, they were not looking for information that was actual threat based. And that was a big miss. I think it was a collective miss on the part of the public, the high-tech companies, and the agencies as well, because the agencies need to promote this notion of see something, say something in social media, and then provide feedback if you actually report something instead of it going into a black hole.
Absolutely. 1000%. Nailed it. The Crooks case, and there's a load of them, but it exposes uh, our federal partners, the FBI, DHS, Secret Service. Their biggest blind spot is that the monitoring system, these much vaunted systems, right? Enormously expensive, enormously sophisticated, enormously complex, and backed with extreme artificial intelligence powered algorithmic methodologies, right, that make it extremely effective. But they don't go after the Lanzas, right? The Adam Lanza up in 2012,
Right.
Sandy Hook, and they don't go after Thomas Matthew Crooks. It's only really the high volume extremist networks. I mean, are we missing the forest for the trees, given historical fact relating to, let's face it, most of the recent threats have been in the lone wolf, this individuals posting violent rants in little tiny corners of the internet, exactly what Crooks did for years. I mean, how do we snatch those guys? How do we pinpoint them?
Is The government can't be everywhere. I mean, and I don't know if anybody in your audience remembers a program called Carnivore. It came in after, it was proposed after 9/11, and it was proposed to do just that, go scarf up all the information on the internet and try to sort through it and find terrorist threats. And that was shot down resoundingly in Congress and across the country, basically, because they didn't want Big Brother on the internet. It wasn't. It's like being in your home. I mean, it's
Right.
just too far out there for the American public. But we've always, as law enforcement, we've always tried to leverage the public, the American public, as you say, the 330 million people out there, 330 million eyes and ears and judgment. And we don't want to create a nation of snitches. That's not what we're going for. What we're going for is just an alert citizenry who are willing to report things that, as we talked about in the earlier segment, that raise the hair on the back of your neck. And I think some people are afraid of interfacing with law enforcement or interacting with law enforcement, or they're going to stigmatize somebody. And if it turns out to be nothing, that's not the case. Law enforcement will apply judgment. They'll check records. They'll do what they do best. And there are a lot more analysts around than when you and I were on the streets out there. We did most of our own analytical work. Now you got, half the cadre of FBI employees are analysts, and they're working, in the cubicle sorting through information that's being reported. The problem is, in my opinion anyway, that when you report into the FBI's system, or a lot of police departments as well, you don't get anything back. And so it doesn't reinforce that reporting aspect. And what they ought to get back is at least a message that says, thanks for the information. We're going to sort through it, and we're going to run, there's a process here. And you may not get information back from us because it could result in an ongoing investigation, but we appreciate the information. Something that just gives you
Right.
that feeling that a human being touched it and
Right.
did something with it.
That's a great point because I think that lack of connective tissue, that
Yeah,
lack of formalized recognition on some level, at least, hey, we got it, we're looking, we got it, we're investigating. We're not going to be back in touch with you every day with interim
right.
dispositions, but we're on the case. And thank you. I think that, correct, that human touch is vital to perpetuate it and to expand it to other folks. Well,
Right.
let's face it, probably a fair measure of Americans are hesitant to call 911 or to call the
Right.
FBI. There's a level of concern, even if they're
Right.
super law abiding, they don't like to deliberately put their head into the lion's mouth, metaphorically. Not that they have anything to be fearful of. And I think there's also a sense, and as often as I can say it, I always say, listen, err on the side of caution. Err on the side of caution. No one will ever fault you for being overly cautious, overly protective. You're on the train, you're on the D train by Yankee Stadium going southbound, and it's a 100-degree July day in New York, and there's a guy sweating with a full-length leather, uh, the
Right.
full-length leather coat, and
Right.
he's looking a little bulky in the middle, right? And he's lean. And
Right.
I mean, these are clues.
Right.
Point them out, call. You have to have situational awareness. I say it all the time, Chris. Grow eyes as Americans, not just in the back of your head, but in the sides of your head, and articulate, state, call. And without that, I don't think there's the greatest AI-powered technology, process, methodologies in the world out there that can perform the needed mission, the necessary mission, right? Without our partners, the
Right.
citizenry. I mean, it's super obvious, right? I mean, see something, say something. It became a metaphor, right? It's almost become
Right.
trite in some ways. Yeah, I heard that, I seen it, like you mentioned earlier with Carnivore and so forth after the towers went down. But it can't be overemphasized in my view. I
Well,
mean,
and as you
because
say,
obviously,
yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt, but as you
yeah, no,
say,
no,
some of the most significant interventions have come off of tips. The Halloween plot, where, up in Michigan and New Jersey, somebody reported that. And I'd like to say law enforcement, did it all by themselves. They didn't. But they acted on it appropriately and they ran with it for quite a while. And even to this day, I don't think they were ready to arrest those people because I think they were still trying to get the full scope of things. But it came off of a tip, and that's significant. And law enforcement, again, has a job to reinforce that and make sure that people are out there, just create a willingness to report.
correct. And I think it has to be articulated as well as, as much as guys like us would be very hesitant to ever publicly state that we really need the public, that we're not, completely self-sufficient, the bodies of law
Right.
enforcement, that we have the technology, the process, the manpower, the expertise. But the reality is we don't, we never did. There's not enough. There's way more bad guys than there are good guys, and that's the sad reality of it. But I think for folks to understand that they're part of that they're part of that team, and again, back to your connecting back with the human touch is absolutely critical. And I don't see how, no matter how sophisticated the AI-powered net is, and no matter how fantastic the technology is, the volume is mind-bending. I mean, the
Right.
volume of posts, the millions and tens and hundreds of millions, probably daily across the globe. I mean, it's really a fallacy in many, many ways, and it's sad because it's the fallacy of of social media, expert social media monitoring, and then the fallacy of follow-up surveillance. We saw that with the
Right.
Sarnia brothers
Yeah.
up at Boston. I
Right.
mean, we have, right? I mean, we have finite economic resources and finite labor resources. I mean, it's unbelievable. It really is. What a job we have in front of us.
Oh, you and I have seen the advance of technology in crime solving and crime prevention and all across the board. I mean, DNA, video surveillance, drones, facial recognition. But I wanted to pick up, before I forget, I wanted to pick up on something you brought up earlier, which I think is critically important. And that is the prospect that there are bad guys out there, hostile foreign intelligence services, terrorist organizations that are looking for people like crooks who and to groom them and to weaponize them. And now the terrorist organizations have done just that. The Tsarnaev brothers are a good example. There,
Yes.
there's a lot of there are many terrorist attacks in the U.S. that we refer to as lone wolf or self-radicalized, but they weren't self-radicalized. They were in places where that propaganda was being published on the internet, and they were being groomed for that very purpose. That the long arm of these terrorist organizations reach right into those basements, and they
Right.
weaponized very successfully some young jihadists in the United States. And it's certainly within the realm of possibility. In fact, it's probable that hostile foreign intelligence services are doing just that. And there, look, Russia, Putin is probably one of the most evil people on this planet. They know it's out there. They know it's a possibility. The mullahs in Iran, North Korea, China, even China won't come out and cause physical attacks, but they'll certainly weaponize these people to for propaganda purposes and to steal information. But the internet's a high crime neighborhood. Let's put it that way.
It, it's a crime neighborhood, and it's being trolled by, to your point, and I could
Right.
not agree more, by these evil headhunters. It's really what
Right.
they are, right? They're out there on the lookout for, you know, nobodies, diminished, spiraling downward youth
Right.
that's susceptible to the narrative,
Right.
that have uh, sequestered themselves and buried themselves in mommy's basement, as I
Right.
referenced earlier, and in these dark, viral chat rooms, and they're sucking this all in, and then one day they go operational. And
Right.
I totally concur that these headhunters, these evil headhunters, are able to cherry pick from the narratives, their post-it narratives, and say, there's a sucker, there's a sitting duck, there's a guy, we can reel him in, right?
Right.
Reel him in, weaponize him, and set him off, set him operational. I mean,
You're,
and
you're right on the right issues.
well, listen, man, you know, I feel like I know you for 20 years, so this was an easy one. So thank you. Keep up all the great work, and please, in New York, let me know.
Ditto.
My
Ditto.
pleasure, man.
Carolina, you
I'm
find your way
affected.
down here, just let me know.
I come down on a motorcycle quite frequently.
All right.
That's some great riding down there, some great roads.
All right.
Listen, all
Let
the
me
best.
know.
Thank you. That was Chris Swecker, a former Assistant Deputy Director of the FBI Criminal Division, a super bright guy and a guy who really knows his business. We got to talking about really the entire collapse of planning and coordination and communication on July 13th, and how it was probably the largest collapse of security in modern history. And I got to say, I really have to go through it now for my listeners and for you guys. I'd love to go through it and basically take it step by step, because this is the most disturbing protective detail failure in modern American history. And I'm going to be taking a close look at this, and I've written and published a number of articles immediately following the July 13th failure out in Butler. And I look at them not with emotion, there's no emotion, and not with politics, but just with facts, focus, and forensic precision. Because what unfolded on July 13th in Butler, Pennsylvania, was not merely a breach, not merely an oversight, not merely a lapse. It was an operational collapse, a collapse so total, so inexplicable, and so profound that it allowed a deeply troubled, psychologically deteriorating 19-year-old nursing home aide. A nursing home aide, no training, no skills, no expertise. He came within a breath of assassinating a former president of the United States. And the only reason Donald J. Trump is alive today is because of a single, underreported, almost buried event. I call it the mysterious ninth round. It's a round fired not by the Secret Service, not by the FBI, not by any of the command element, but by a lone local SWAT sergeant, Sergeant Aaron Zaliponi. That's Zaliponi. And it's important because this guy is a monumental hero. He's assigned to the Adams Township Police Department and the Butler County SWAT Unit. And he's also a former U.S. Army combat veteran. This guy's the real deal. And clearly he's very humble. He didn't beat his chest. He didn't go on 60 Minutes and talk about what a great job he did. But this is a man who fired one extraordinary, perfectly timed round at the precise moment when every other protective layer of Donald J. Trump had already failed. This round, the ninth round, shattered the shooter's rifle stock. And it's a round that cut the gunman's neck with the rifle stock, the wood from the rifle stock. But most importantly, it's a round that disabled the weapon. It prevented the recoil spring on the AR-15 from advancing another round. Let's go through that for a second. Let's look at the chronology. Thomas Matthew Crooks gets on the roof. He fires a volley of 5 rounds, and then he fires a volley of 3 rounds. He strikes the former president in the head. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, the ear is part of the head. And he kills a former fire chief, Corey Comparatori, and he seriously wounds 2 other men standing beside Comparatori. 10 full seconds. 10 full seconds. That's 1 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000. pass. Before the counter snipers, that's the team that's directly behind President Trump on the stage. They pivot and they were able to put a round into the jaw of Thomas Matthew Crooks that terminated the attack and put him in the graveyard. But the round that ended the attack is the ninth round, because that effectively neutralized Thomas Matthews Crooks' weapon. It gave him a useless weapon where he was not able to chamber the remaining 22 rounds and fire them at the stage, almost certainly killing our brave president, who was standing with fist raised, surrounded by the brave Secret Service. This guy had 22 more rounds he could have fired and another 60 rounds by his right knee. So the round that was fired by Sergeant Aaron Zalapone, the round that almost no Americans are aware of, is the singular main reason that President Trump is alive today. It's unbelievable. Yet the federal narrative barely mentions it. It's minimized. It's basically buried as if it were an inconvenient truth. Why in God's name would that be? This is a monumentally important fact. This is the most important fact, the single most important fact, that round from approximately 130 yards, when Sergeant Zalapone went to his knee like a warrior, like a true combat vet, like an extraordinary professional, set his scope, set his sights, and shot Crooks's rifle to bits. It is beyond unbelievable. So tonight, we're going to break down this whole event, piece by piece. The entire July 13th debacle. The way I've done it hundreds of times during my career, disassembling, deconstructing, and then reconstructing complex cases. I did it as a former NYPD robbery detective in the South Bronx for many years, and also as the founder and CEO of one of the largest private security firms in the nation. Because when you've run security operations across 43 states and 525 cities, like I have, and when your teams have protected the Prime Minister of Saudi Arabia, several United States senators, mayors, and some of the wealthiest family offices in America, you know what a functioning protection plan looks like and what a failing security plan feels like. And on July 13th, every single protective safeguard failed. Let's go through them. I start with the 7 deadly sins of July 13th. I've named them deliberately, the 7 deadly sins, because these were not minor mistakes. They were catastrophic, fundamental, and structural errors of great magnitude. Sin number 1, no drone detection. The only drone was the one that Thomas Matthew Crooks put in the air to do his reconnaissance surveillance in order to unleash his wicked, wicked plan to kill the greatest president in the history of America. Nope, not one layer of counter-drone technology was deployed. Not one system to detect, ID, classify, or even to geolocate a hostile drone. I've worked deeply in counter-drone technology. We've demonstrated on this very program and on many other programs, including Fox and Newsmax and others, how today's technology, today's artificial intelligence-driven systems can detect drones from miles out and even pinpoint the operator's location, but how they can also pin out and pinpoint snipers' nests, hidden cowardly snipers who were secreted on roofs and in their little cowardly perches can be identified with the ability and the technology today and mitigated through counter-drone technology. So Crooks, he knew about drones. He flew his own drone. Nobody noticed it. Nobody tracked it. Nobody intercepted it. Absolute cardinal sin. A huge, huge failure. The fact that there were no snipers on Building 6 really, it just takes my breath away. I mean, this is the very roof that crooks used, Building 6. The snipers were inside the building, not on the roof, not on the perimeter. They were inside the building. This is a breakdown in command, control, communication, and coordination that is incomprehensible. In fact, Crooks parked his car, get this, his personal vehicle, which went around the magnetometers, loaded with explosives, weapons, bulletproof vests, drones, and extra rounds. He went around the magnetometers and parked his car right next to the personal vehicles of the SWAT operators who were secreted inside Building 6. The mind reels from it all. This is unbelievable. Sin number 3, there was no unified communications. Agencies on different radios, different frequencies, different chains of commands. Some people had radios, some didn't have radios. This is a presidential event. They were using runners, humans as runners, to go from building to building because there were different command posts because they didn't unify it, which is madness of a biblical level. These runners were bringing the messages from building to building. Unreal. Sin 4, no single brain of the operation. No unified command. No intelligence, surveillance, crowd movement, or perimeter threats were unified under one command structure. Everyone was operating as its own separate entity. No connective tissue. Zero. Sin number 5, no tactical briefing. We would do briefings on minor events where we weren't just protecting individuals, we might be protecting portfolio assets at Brosnan Security. And we would still always do a pre-event briefing to ensure that everyone knew the plan. We were always collectively reading off the same sheet of music. You identify choke points, you identify likely threats. This is a presumptive nominee for the presidency and a former president on the stage, and none of this was done. Zero. No plan. No understanding of roof lines, escape routes, drone hazards. Zero. So no written plan, nothing on paper, no assignment list, no deployment assignments. Officer Jones, you're on this roof. Officer Smith, you're on that roof. You're responsible for this perimeter. You're responsible for drone mitigation. No assignment of duties. Zero. And sin number 7, no drone of their own. None of the drones for first responders went in the air. The only drone in the air was Thomas Matthew Crooks. Mind-blowing. A basic principle in modern protection: bring your own drone. You use your drone to detect their drone. You use your drone to identify hidden threats. This was not done. Zero. Consequences of those failures were horrific. And through those failures walked a sad, disturbed 19-year-old named Thomas Matthew Crooks, a young man who was no mastermind, not by a long shot, a nursing home dietitian's aide, in fact, who I wouldn't trust to provide a sponge bath. He was not a trained operative, not a hardened assassin. He was a kid with a gun, lonely, angry kid. He's living in a bizarre world of numerous violent posts, wicked ideologies, threats against the president for years, day after day, on numerous social media platforms, yet he was invisible. He was never identified. No one knew who he was. He was the total invisible man. Parked next to the SWAT team, right in their parking spot, in their own personal parking spots. He parked his car, the car with the rifle, the ammo, and the bombs. How in God's name did this happen? How could this possibly happen? He jumped up on the roof, stood on the air conditioner, brought himself up on a roof, positioned himself with a perfect field of sight, about a football field and a half away from President Trump, and he fired 8 rounds. Shot the former president in the head. Yes, the ear is part of the head. Seriously wounded 2 civilians and murdered a former fire chief. Every single protective layer failed. This is critical. And this fact, this monumentally important fact, is almost completely unknown to the public. Brooks had a full 10 seconds after hitting the former president. Let me count that out for the audience. That's 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000, 5, 1,000, 6, 1,000, 7, 1,000, 8, 1,000, 9, 1,000, 10, 1,000. That is an eternity when you were armed, elevated, scoped, and firing, as Thomas Matthew Crooks was. The counter snipers who were immediately behind Trump on the stage could not fire immediately because they were positioned right behind Trump and had to physically reposition and pivot, a process that took those 10 long, terrifying seconds. If Crooks's weapon had remained functional, Sergeant Zalaponi's 9th round had not destroyed Crooks's weapon, President Trump would be dead. Secret Service agents would be dead. People on the stage would be dead. This is not theory. This is simple, brutal, ballistic facts. Brooks had 22 rounds left in the weapon. He had the elevation, and most importantly, he had the time. He had 10 seconds to unleash holy hell on that stage. The only thing he didn't have, after Zalaponi's miraculous 9th round, was a working rifle. And that's because of one man, Sergeant Zalaponi. And this is an indisputable, irrefutable material fact. And by the way, this is a congressional fact. This fact has been captured in the report to Congress by Congressman Clay Higgins. And this is where the story becomes even more extraordinary. Because while the counter snipers were struggling to reposition, they had to identify where precisely he was on the sloped roof. And while communications were fractured and non-existent, and while coordination was frozen, one guy had the angle, Zalaponi. And as a U.S. Army combat veteran, he's a guy who was used to chaos. He saw Crooks, he saw the rifle, and he saw the angle. He fired one amazing round. And that round destroyed the rifle, cut Crooks, and disabled the weapon. And that prevented any more rounds from coming out of Crooks' rifle. And that round, the 9th round, again, can't say it enough, saved the former president's life. I got to repeat it, because no one else will. That round saved the former president's life. And Congressman Clay Higgins explicitly states this in his report to Congress. Yet the federal narrative minimizes it. FBI waves it off. Multiple agencies avoided discussing it, and the official statements danced around it. Why? Why? Well, because acknowledging Zalaponi's heroic round means acknowledging every failure that made that round necessary. Every single collective failure that we have outlined. Let me say this as a former NYPD detective and a man whose company has protected U.S. senators and prime ministers, etc. There is no universe in which a suicidal, angry, erratic, inexperienced 19-year-old with bombs, a rifle, and a drone should have been able to first get onto the grounds. That's number one. There's metal detectors, there's magnetometers, there's hand wanding, there's armed personnel everywhere. He should never, ever, ever have gotten past the magnetometers onto a roof and into an elevated firing position. But he did. And he struck the president. And this is a once in a generation, thank God Almighty, protective failure. And it is made infinitely more troubling by the way the ninth round, the actual heroic event that saved the day, is downplayed, dismissed, and buried. Because that round exposes the truth. And the truth is this: the system didn't save President Trump. A single local SWAT sergeant did. The ninth round was the difference between life and death. Not a plan, not a briefing, not a drone, not a command post, not a unified team, not a federal layer. It was one man. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.